Everyone is vulnerable to being pinned when life plays hardball, whether it is a physical or mental health condition. No one can stand alone. For those who are not pinned, appreciate that it could be you or loved one someday. So when you see a chance to help someone, please do. They are not weak, they are pinned. Even a slight hand up and a listening ear can begin seriously lightening the load, change, or save a life. Help end stigma. Move from being pinned to purpose. Time for a hand up.
Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Moore, founder of the Pin to Purpose podcast. And I'm very happy today to welcome our guest, James Burton, who is a speech language pathologist and an owner of Stuttering Blueprint. So before I start and pass it over to James to tell us a little bit about himself, I also want to thank Steve Ramona, who does his own podcast, Business with a Servant's Heart. And that's where I met James, because Steve runs workshops and gets together a lot of podcasters and people who are involved in causes that are, really leading, as he calls it, with a servant's heart. So I want to give a shout out to Steve and his work, because I think he does great things, and it was fantastic that he connected us. So James, again, I'm really happy that we can have a good conversation today. As I've mentioned to you on our side with Pin to Purpose, the goals are to help to shatter stigma and give people a hand up on their healing journeys. And certainly the work you're doing is doing just that. So before we get into it, though, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background and some of the reasons why you've decided to dedicate yourself in this field.
All right, I'd be happy to answer, and thank you so much for having me on. I really love the whole concept of this podcast. Pin to Purpose really speaks to my own experiences, and it's fair to say many of my clients have been in that pinned position.
That's great. And so James, in going back in time, I understand that there were quite a few things that were pinning you that were big challenges that you had to overcome. And so maybe if you want to refer to a little bit about that and how that did lead you into or have more of a focus on helping people who stutter.
All right. Well, I have got a good pinned story, and it started about 3 years ago on the day I got separated from who is now my ex-wife. And that was the first pillar of many pillars of my life, all sort of crumbling at the same time. So it started with the marriage. I felt like very dedicated, and it was very important to me, and it eventually stopped working. And that was the first thing to think, wow, okay, if I'm not concentrating on being a good husband and a good partner and helping my wife and doing those things, what am I here for? So that was one of the things that crumbled. At the same time, I have been a speech therapist in the school system for almost 17 years, public, private, and for a long time in a school for kids with specific learning challenges. So a lot of clients, very much overwhelmed almost all the time with the sheer number of clients that I was trying to help. And I was reaching burnout stage. It was starting to feel like the caseload was getting bigger and the budget was staying the same. And I was spreading myself more and more thin and kind of pretending that I had it all together, in the sense of, no, okay, less budget, I got this, we'll put it together, we'll figure it out. But it was starting to fall apart. And what kind of tipped my leaving that job is I ended up hiring a separate speech therapist to help me. And then the next year came around and the budget sort of lowered again. And I realized that to keep her employed and for me to stay employed wasn't going to work. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm burning out anyway. And then I was discovered online by a coaching service. And I was trying to promote at the time what was like a social skills program for kids with autism. And that was, it worked a little bit, but it didn't really get off the ground. And I started to realize that, what is my real passion within speech therapy? And working with people who stutter has always been incredibly rewarding. It started early on when I was still a grad student, and I was working with on one of my practicums, I was working with a group of people, 10 people who stuttered in a 10-day intensive stuttering program. And this was mostly all focused on speech output. How are we going to make everyone speak more fluently without stuttering? So it was like almost like a mechanical focus, or a cosmetic focus. We got to make this speech acceptable. And to society, I am not saying that stuttered speech is not acceptable. In fact, right. What I learned in starting to create this offering was that I was looking at it in an old way. And I discovered this when I talked to an old client. And this was one of my most successful clients. And he looked at me through the Zoom screen, and he said, James, I don't know what happened. I just kind of went back to my old habits. I started avoiding certain words. I avoided speaking because I didn't want people to hear me stutter. And all of the progress that we'd made, like in terms of making his speech sound socially acceptable, seemed to vanish on him. And he almost seemed apologetic to me, like he'd let me down. And what I actually felt was this deep feeling of shame myself, like I'd let you down. I thought I was working on what we needed to work on, like making your speech sound nice, and it did. But then all of the worries, the concerns about how he might sound, that we hadn't addressed those. And that is why it didn't stick. It didn't last. We hadn't dealt with the underlying issue. Mm-hmm. And the underlying issue when it comes to stuttering is this feeling of not enoughness. Like the way I speak, if I stutter, isn't good enough. And the only way to be acceptable is to fix that so that everyone can feel comfortable. It's like a very understandable form of people pleasing. When you're told over and over that stuttering is not right, and you must be nervous, or you must not know what you're talking about, is there something wrong with you? That all gets internalized. And if we don't address that, then no matter how perfect we make the speech, the insecurities remain there. And it becomes much easier to continue to avoid speaking than to try speaking, even with a very effective technique, because you still feel like you're wearing a mask. Mm-hmm. You're still using a certain way of speaking in order to sound a certain way. And the weight of wearing that mask is too heavy to lead to long-term freedom from stuttering, freedom from this feeling of not enoughness. So that is what I discovered when I talked to my ex-client. Now, going back to my own life sort of falling apart, this was like, I thought I was like one of the leading experts in stuttering. And in many ways I was. But again, it was in this sort of cosmetic way, and like, how are we going to fix the speech? And what I needed to learn was starting to use techniques like acceptance commitment therapy, meditation techniques, ways to learn to accept ourselves in order to release some of that sense of not enoughness. So I felt like, oh, I've been failing and I've done it wrong for all these years. So I worked insanely hard to fix this problem. And I actually succeeded. I succeeded in the sense that I got myself a client who came in, and I tried these new techniques. And finally, we started to see something more important than perfect speech. We started to see a relaxation of the perfectionism that really interferes with keeping the speech even. So as we worked on the self-acceptance. The speech seemed to come along because there was a relaxation around it. There wasn't this clinging to perfection. So far, that was the good thing that came out of it. But so far, I'd lost my wife. Not she's fine, but we're divorced. And then the career with the burnout piece, and then the last part of the career that I really thought I got a handle on was kind of taken away. And as all of these things started to be taken away, one's sense of identity kind of begins to dissolve. And while that was terrifying, it was also kind of freeing.
Mm.
And now, while this was all, as this happened, I worked really hard to keep working on the business, but I also knew that I needed to do more, do a bit of healing for myself as well. So I went traveling, and I took my business and my computer with me, and I started, the first place I went was Nepal, and I did some volunteering there. I worked with a company called Karma Flights, and we gathered money to get winter coats to hand out to Nepalis in the Rakum region, which is quite distant and quite impoverished. And this would help the kids get to school. And so this felt really good, but I'm still hammering away on my business at the same time. And then the next stage of the journey, I went to India, and I searched out my grandfather's old home. He was a tea planter in like the 20s to the early 50s. And he had a home there that is now a hotel. So I got to reach that. So I'm going on these kind of spiritual journeys. I did Vipassana on the way, and all sort of in an attempt to kind of find myself and also practice what I preach in terms of the letting go and the meditation and all of those things that would actually help people who stutter. So that's kind of how I got to this point, wanting to help a group of people that are underserved and do something that allows people to. For me, it's a lot more about feeling good in yourself and your communication than it is about that perfect speech that we've usually gone for.
Fantastic. No, that's an incredible story. And I wanted to, before continuing with the story and where you've taken it, I learned something when I was reading a bit of a background before this other podcast about the numbers in society of stutterers, because I wasn't as aware that it was as prevalent. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, the percentage of people in society that have a stutter or stuttering.
Absolutely. So 1% of the population could be classified as a person who stutters. And how we classify that, the old way of doing it was we would sort of count the stutters. So if someone stutters more than 1% of their syllables, those are the people that tend to come for help, go to a speech therapist, these are the people that people get concerned about their kids if they're stuttering more than 1%. People worry about their own speech if they're stuttering more than 1%. But that also, within that 1%, there's also a spectrum from like someone who stutters less intensely, you'd barely notice, to someone who stutters quite intensely and you couldn't help but notice. Now, the interesting thing, though, is the amount someone stutters or the intensity with which someone stutters is not directly related to how they feel about their speech. So you'll have someone who stutters quite mildly. You'd almost never hear it. They're very good at not stuttering where you would hear it, but they're thinking about it all the time. It's in the mind.
Sure.
It's affecting the way they interact. And one of the people that I met in my travels and in my practice prior was a man who stuttered very intensely, like almost every 2 or 3 syllables he would stutter, and in a quite an obvious way, but he didn't mind. He was so confident with it. He would look you in the eye. His shoulders were back. He was confident. The body language was strong. And the only reason that I even met him was he was there for his son, because as much as he had come to a point of self-acceptance, it would have been a rough road, and anyone would want to spare their child from that. So it was very understandable that he was there, but he certainly didn't have any interest in working on his own stutter with me, which I had. That was a real eye-opener for me, to see someone who could accept themselves 100% while stuttering intensely.
Sounds like a real role model in that sense. At the end of the day, if you're talking about, it's not about perfection at all. It's about comfort and just, it's part of neurodiverse community and unique aspects that make people, who they are. And then you're helping them to the degree that I guess I was reading on your website when, people have to be ready to be on a program and to want to work on their stuttering. I wanted to ask you if you have any comments on, what you think the most harmful misconceptions are in terms of what society has about people who stutter.
Some of the most obvious one is people think people are less intelligent if they stutter. People think that they are nervous because for most of us, if we're not a person who stutters in that 1%, when we stutter, it's usually when we are nervous. It's sort of like a threshold. You get nervous enough, anyone will stutter. Now, of course, if someone already has a stutter and then they get nervous, they're going to probably stutter more. But when someone, much like the gentleman I mentioned, sometimes they'll stutter when they're not nervous. So it is not a sign of nervousness. It is not a sign of lack of intelligence. In fact, some studies show that people who stutter are more intelligent. That wasn't replicated, but nearly a standard deviation above average in terms of IQ and things like that. These measures are all a little bit suspect, but if anything, people who stutter are more likely to be more intelligent than less. So these are the kinds of myths that get internalized by the people who stutter themselves, and hence the need to cover it, the need to hide it from people so they're not get judged. It's a very understandable way of dealing with it. Try to avoid stuttering in order to not be judged. But what ends up happening is that unless you have something like the National Stuttering Association, which is doing amazing work, but is probably, I would argue, not as well known as I wish it were. The kinds of things that they talk about are the same kinds of things. The self-acceptance, the getting rid of the myths, the learning how to stutter with confidence. But you don't, because of that range of people who stutter, for the most part, and I could be wrong here, but I would probably guess that most of the people who are interested in that are people that stutter more intensely and are less able to hide it. So this is more, it's less of an option to do the hiding and the avoiding. And there's a massive amount of people in the middle who can hide it and choose to, for obvious reasons. But what that leads to is an inflation of this sense that if you stutter, there's something wrong with you, because everyone's busy hiding it from each other. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating is a friend of mine who stutters quite intensely said that when she met other people who stutter, she tried to hide it even more because she didn't want them to think that she was mocking them.
That's fascinating. Wow. That's something. I guess along those lines, I had a question, I think, that relates to this in terms of how can we shift the narrative from fixing speech then to celebrating diverse ways of communicating? Because and I'd like to learn about this. Maybe it's a two-part question, but because when you're working with clients, you are, I guess, examining what their objectives are. But within that, you may be able to help them. As you say, there's a spectrum, and yet your goal is not perfection, right? So how can you shift the narrative from fixing speech to celebrating diverse ways of communicating?
Well, one of the things that you brought up earlier, which I don't think a lot of people really understand or know what it means in terms of what the importance of this is stuttering as neurodivergence. So stuttering only very, very recently was classified by leading experts. I mean, I'm not just talking about any experts here. I'm talking about the people who wrote the textbook that most therapists use in grad school, people like Barry Guitar, Rosalie Schenker. These are big names. You probably haven't heard them if you're not in the stuttering world, but they're big names in the stuttering world. They got together a couple of years ago, and there was a symposium where they recognized stuttering as a neurodivergence in the same category as something like autism, but not the same at all. Sometimes they overlap, but they're not the same. They're just different forms of neurodivergence, much like ADHD. And the one that I like to talk about is left-handedness. And the reason I like left-handedness is that here's an example of something that not long ago was considered a defect. You're left-handed, there's something wrong with you. You know, many children were forced to write with their right hand.
I'm smiling just because my eldest son was, and it's interesting. My oldest son was forced to move from left to right, which I wasn't really aware of at the time. And yet my youngest son is left-handed and nobody changed it in the same school. So it's quite, I've experienced that a little bit directly in our family.
Right. And so here we have two kids, probably within a couple of years of each other in the same school. And we're seeing the change, like was it the elder one was asked to change and the younger one wasn't?
Yes, the elder one was asked to change and his younger brother is 4 years younger, was not.
Well, here's a perfect example of what I would love to see for stuttering. Okay, so it used to be a terrible thing. We're going to make you learn to write with your right hand. And now if you ask someone if they should shift, especially if you go to a school now, no one would care. You just write with your left, and it's not a big deal. And when eventually stuttering is viewed in the same way, and this is what being able to advocate like this on podcasts is so powerful for, when it is viewed that way, so many of the reasons that people are hiding, the people are feeling bad about themselves, the reason that feeling like they're not enough will begin to disappear. But I do not think that that is going to necessarily happen just on its own. There needs to be a sort of a critical mass of people who stutter themselves accepting that and accepting themselves and advocating for themselves. And we're seeing that in the National Stuttering Association, but I don't think it's hit critical mass for the entire population. We just had an American president who stuttered, and it still isn't really something that gets talked about. I mean, not that I noticed, maybe a little bit. There was a bit of mudslinging around it, but apart from that, there was no someone so powerful, so like, you know, that kind of like the pinnacle of success in the Western world is like being the president. And here's someone who stutters doing it, and yet it's still not making the news. So something in society isn't quite ready. And I feel like it's about to pop, but not yet, apparently.
On that point, I mean, do you feel that the role of media is taking this in new directions now? And maybe, like, well, as you said, for podcasts, for social media and things, we have the chance to bring these messages forward more often. You know, you're on a number of podcasts. So, but the role of media overall, do you think that that's helping or hindering progress right now?
It depends on which media you're talking about. Think about something like social media for a moment. And what do we do on social media? This is a well-known thing. Everyone puts up pictures of them doing really successful things and having the best part of their life. They're not putting their bad days on there. So you have this sort of falsified perfect view of everybody else's life. When you go and you compare yourself to everyone's perfect view of their life, you kind of feel bad about yourself. People who stutter, like Samuel L. Jackson, the ex-president, you know, they're not out there stuttering they do stutter. They've talked about being a person who stutters, but in a movie, they're going to cut anything where they stutters and refilm that, so you don't see it. So media, in my opinion, is still helping via editing and via everyone putting their best foot forward in not allowing people to see what a real stutterer looks like. So it still looks like it's something that is relegated to the very, very few.
Right. That's unfortunate. Yeah. And it's not giving the true picture that people will learn from. In terms of what do you think empowers people most, with stuttering? I mean, what is most empowering for them? I mean, I'm sure your programs, you also talked about, I mean, it's also in terms of the cognitive or the meditation, I believe, around it. I mean, if you can just clarify what empowers them most, in your opinion.
I think the most empowering thing for people who stutter is meeting other people who stutter.
Okay.
Because there's so many more people out there that stutter. And when we start to realize that it's part of just the normal spectrum of being human, people start to, and this is what I got to witness when I was a grad student. These 10 people over 10 days getting to know each other, supporting one another, even though we were just in a sense supporting them to learn how to mask it better. Being around other people who stutter was so freeing, and the relief and the feeling of like being understood, that is powerful. But just like with my friend who's hiding it from, two people who stutter meet and they're busy hiding it from each other. So even if they meet, they're not going to necessarily know to accept one another in that way, unless they're in something like the National Stuttering Association. But there's a barrier there, because one of the myths about stuttering is that many people who stutter themselves have internalized is, oh, if I'm around other people who stutter, I'm going to stutter more. So I want to avoid that. I don't want them to trigger me to stutter more. Right. So it's kind of like stuttering, especially, is in a category of secrecy, silence, and judgment. And if you recognize those three from Brene Brown's talk on shame, so what does shame need to grow? Secrecy, silence, and judgment. And it's exactly what the situation is for people who stutter. We want to keep it a secret. Better to be silent than to stutter. And if I do stutter, I judge myself. And if other people stutter, they might judge me. There's all of those things building up this vibration of shame around something, which is a neurodivergence, something that if we changed our attitude as a society, wouldn't be as big a deal. And that, I think, in the long run is the key. So getting people together. And that was my great desire in my program, was to bring people together, learn about the myths, debunk them, and support one another to go out there and be proud of who they are. We can still work on a little bit of making speech easier, but the main thing is to be able to just be themselves.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's interesting. I'm thinking about it because the whole goal, again, of the metaphor about the bench press and dealing with challenges, which sometimes are easy to deal with, but then, as you talked about some of your own journey, like you're having more weight put on because you've got multiple challenges and you don't have a break, and it's like you're not having a hand up, and eventually anyone in the world can get pinned. And it's not a matter of being weak. You can be in a weakened state because of all of this that you're dealing with. So I'm thinking again about the analogies here with people who stutter and people who, as you refer to, if you're caught in, secrecy, silence, or shame, secrecy, and silence, then your common humanity and the weight being lifted off of yourself by feeling you are enough. You are just neurodivergent, and you need to be, in that community to just have that support or the spot. It's I guess these types of dialogues with compassionate experts such as yourself and others that are dealing with it, to remind ourselves we are all human. And we, when you can feel the empathy, and I don't stutter, but I certainly have other challenges, and but I can try to empathize fully and understand, and hopefully, this is all a path to allowing people to, respect their individuality and realize they are enough.
And in the end, what are we, I mean, to take it down to the basic thing, what do we all want? If you could use one word for what we all want, I'm just going to wonder what you say here. Like the common thing that every single person in the entire world wants. If you had to say one thing, what do you think it would be?
That's a fantastic question. I mean, I think it is acceptance. I think we want compassion, we want acceptance, we want to we want to be ourselves.
We want authenticity.
Yes.
Feeling like enough.
Yes.
Happiness, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. I mean, again, it's a very thought-provoking discussion, and I agree with you. Sometimes it's hard to boil it down to one word, but I agree with you. Absolutely.
So if I could talk about my own journey for a minute.
Great.
My own. So as my life is somewhat crumbling around me, and we've got the marriage and the career and the financial situation wasn't going good. Oh yes, I completely forgot to mention I got a brain tumor in there, so I had to get surgery partway through having started the business, and so we got health, relationship, finances, and career have all now crumbled. Oh, lost the dog in there. She's fine, but she's with my ex, and so all of these things are. And so the first thing I do is desperately cling to all of the things that made me a success in the first place. I was a successful speech therapist with a pretty wife and the nice car and the good apartment, and all of this is gone. I gotta get it back. I gotta get it back now. And I raced into trying to be enough and trying to be enough and trying to be enough and trying to be enough. But lucky for me, as I was starting this process, I decided to go to Mexico so I could be alone and focus on this new business and just not have any distractions. And I sat and I worked, and I was doing 10-hour days. And now, fortunately, I was in a place I could go wing foiling, which is a bit like kite surfing. That's my passion in life. So I would like work all day, go for a wing foil for a couple of hours, and then come back and work. But fortunately, while I was down there, I met my friend Matt, and Matt kind of changed my life, because I started going, and he has this meditation dome. So I went and I started meditating with Matt, and that started to feel good. And he started to poke holes in all of the sort of assumptions I made about what I needed to be happy. And so I thought I needed, I've lost all my money and I've lost my wife. I need a new career, lots more money, and a new wife, or a new relationship, and all of when I get all those things, I'm going to be happy. Darn it. And through the meditation, and it was Matt's encouragement that got me to go to Nepal and India, and then I went back to Mexico and continued meditating with him, and then I decided to go off to I went to Peru. And when I got to Peru, an interesting thing happened. I get to Peru and I got all my wing foiling gear, and I'm trying to get up north where the wing foiling is. So I get on the bus. Now, I didn't realize that in the 25 years that have passed since I've been to Peru before, the bus system is not as safe as it used to be. So
they go pretty fast. I think I've had some experiences there.
It wasn't because of the traffic so much, is that I got set up by the taxi mafia in Lima, And they helped me. They're very, very helpful people they were. And they got me onto this bus, and they arranged, I'm fairly sure, I figured this out later, they arranged for me to get robbed. So the bus gets pulled over in the middle of the night. People dressed as police come on and take me off and say they need to see your passport. And all of this was just a way to get me say, yes, okay, you can search me. And then they went through my pockets and took all my money. And this was terrifying. You know, you're in a foreign country and you're in the middle of the night, you get woken up and this giant guy dressed as a police officer comes and like demands your passport, all this kind of stuff. Then you take all your money and they're like, oh my God. And this experience of fear led me to hide in my hostel. For when I got there to the other end, I hid in my hostel for the next few days. And this experience of fear was intense, and it kind of was it added to all of the fears that I was having around the business, which wasn't moving along very fast, and I'm like worrying about it all the time. And so this fear experience was so much more intense than the business fears that it kind of put all of that in perspective.
Right, very good.
And then I went on, while I was in Cusco, I went to do an ayahuasca ceremony. And, more like, again, Matt came and showed up there too. So he encouraged me with this. And in the ayahuasca ceremony, you take a medicine, and the medicine makes you feel ill, and then you throw up, and then you take more medicine, and then you see visions and all those wonderful things. But I felt like as I was purging, because you just kind of have to, because the medicine makes you sick, each time I would throw up some of that fear. And by the end of it, I was like, it felt like I'd let go of something important, like the fear around not having enough. Once you've like been in a foreign country with no money and no credit card for a while, and you somehow survive it, you're like, you know what? Maybe the unknown isn't quite so scary as I thought it was.
That's great. I wanted to ask a couple more questions. Are there real barriers for people to access speech therapy? I mean, how does that work in Canada, for example, where we are?
The barriers to getting good speech therapy is trust is a huge one. Because of the way we've approached it for so many years. In this, we're going to fix the speech, right? And when we fix your speech, you're going to be happy. But it doesn't work that way. So people try it, and they get their speech to, oh, I've improved it. And then just like my ex-client, they go off and the real world comes back in, and they stop using the technique, or they don't want to use the technique because it kind of still feels a little bit like they're using a way of speaking. You give someone who stutters a new way of speaking that doesn't feel natural. It's not a fun thing to have to do. So then the trust goes. I've tried it. It didn't work. This kind of hiding it thing kind of works for me. I don't want to try it anymore. So people will come in for their kids, but they won't come in for themselves, because we've been working on it in this kind of backwards way for so long. So there's a huge trust factor. Now, even if you get over that and you decide you're going to find a speech therapist, we're hard to find. And then beyond that, you find a speech therapist, but their knowledge of stuttering is limited. Because of the nature of speech therapy being a very, very broad field. We all kind of specialize in our little areas, and we're kind of generalists for everything else. And some things we don't know anything about, so we refer on. But there are many people that know just enough about stuttering to start giving you some techniques to help you alleviate the speech. But again, then it doesn't last because they don't have the focused expertise in this particular area. They're not bad speech therapists. They just don't know. They don't have like the focus in this area. So sometimes a little bit of knowledge is worse than a lot. So you end up, again, people will try it and it doesn't work. And that, combined with the secrecy, silence, and judgment leading to shame, is keeping people from even applying. And when they do, they don't find the right specialist, and when they find the wrong specialist, they get something that doesn't last. So the trust goes down, and these are the barriers. And I am still facing these barriers in my promotion of what I'm trying to do for people.
A couple of other thoughts or questions for you. I don't know if you'd like to share another story that helps to, best illustrate the transformation that's possible when stigma is reduced, when people don't feel that shame as part of what's holding them back.
I think I'd like to talk about one of the clients that I've seen most recently that I was able to use some of the acceptance commitment therapy as using mindfulness techniques and meditation. And I was so pleased because I had never used this phrase with her. And she's fairly young, so she came up with these words herself. And she said, "You know what I think I need to do is I just kind of need to let this go." I'm like, yes, that's exactly. I didn't want to say it because telling someone that they got to let it go is like, how do you let something go? But when she came up with that herself, I'm like, oh, you just graduated. You just graduated. And I mean, she still needed some help to continue to let it go and explore that. Letting go is a lot harder than it sounds. And this I know from having to let go of an identity. And stuttering becomes part of someone's identity. I stutter, so I can't do this. I stutter, so I won't do that. I couldn't possibly be a lawyer, say, because I'd have to talk too much, So people are limiting themselves and only going for things where they don't have to talk so much. And when she told me that I just have to let it go, I knew we were going to get somewhere. And within another 2 to 3 weeks, she was doing amazing. And she wasn't, and it wasn't because her speech did improve. I say that with finger quotes, in terms of it got more smooth. But what's more important is that the times that she did stutter a little bit, it didn't throw her off and send her into a spiral of shame and fear. And I'm not going to talk. It's just like, oh, I stuttered. Okay, here we go. Keep going. And it took some time to get there, but that was a success for me. It wasn't hearing that I spoke in front of my class. She was like in university, and I've spoken in front of my class and I didn't stutter. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool, great. But it was when she told, like, I spoke in front of my class and I did stutter, but then I just kept going and it was fine. I was like, yes, that's
Fantastic.
it.
Fantastic.
That's the real deal.
And you were talking about how when people get together, stutterers get together and build those communities. I mean, hopefully those types of short stories are shared,
Yes. When people who stutter get together, it is incredibly powerful. I've seen it with my own eyes, and I hear more and more stories from the National Stuttering Association of people who are doing that. But I still think that there is a massive swath of people that aren't quite intense enough in their stuttering to feel like self-acceptance is the only way. They have like variable success in keeping it under wraps. So they keep going back to that. And self-acceptance never really becomes an option because I'm still working on this other strategy, which is the hiding it and the self-suppression, which works to a degree, but comes with all sorts of psychological baggage.
We've covered a lot of ground, James, and I want to give you a chance too, if you have any final thoughts or points that you'd like to go over or highlight. I mean, if there's one particular message or a couple of other messages you want to give to our viewers, and I'll be posting the link to your website too, so anybody who'd like to connect with you directly can do that and look into your services as well. But as we kind of wrap up, I think a pretty rich conversation. I'm wondering if there's one or two more things that you'd like to highlight or say.
Well, if someone wants to come and work with me, and if you invite me to work with you on stuttering, I would be more than happy to do so. Just check it out at stutteringblueprint.com, and on there you can either set yourself up for a free consultation or just send me an email and start a conversation. And there's no pressure, okay? Because pressure is the last thing people who stutter need or some kind of big system that they can't try and they have to like commit right away. It's none of that. It's just come and have a conversation. We'll take it at your speed, because that's the only way to make progress in something like this. We have to give people the space to take the time that they need. Now, I also wanted to point out that I realize that letting go is hard. And I do practice what I preach in this sense. So over these travels, what I've begun to realize that my why, my reason for doing this was a little bit tainted at the beginning. You know, I wanted to get back everything that I'd like. I want to be, oh, look, if I have a successful stuttering business, then I'll be enough. And it has been very challenging to reach people. And so I've had to let go of this big idea. Now it might get there, and I sincerely hope it does. But if it doesn't, then I will be perfectly happy serving the odd person that wants to come. It doesn't have to be a big thing. I don't need this to be enough. In fact, if nothing happened entirely, maybe it all dries up, and then I'll still be okay. I think that's really important, because while I may not stutter myself, having gone through this feeling of not enoughness and begun to let it go and begun to feel like enough, whether I'm serving 100 or 1 or none, and, you know, maybe working my hands in some way, it doesn't matter. I still feel like enough. And that was hard won. Not hard won in the sense of a lot of, you know, working and stressing about it, but just sitting, letting go, the emotional piece. And that's been the real journey for me. So I also have, if someone is interested in the letting go process, and this, I have nothing to sell anybody, okay? This is just me talking about my real journey and wondering whether there are other people in this world who have sort of started to, and I know there are because I've met some of them, but to start a conversation of what does it mean to let go and demask? Because that's the one thing that I think made me a good therapist, was the people were able to take down their masks and feel accepted, whether they stuttered or not. And I think that's my superpower, is just feeling free to be unmasked. And that's why I'm freely admitting that this isn't, I'm not coming on here as a super businessman with massive successful business, but I'm okay. And if we want to talk about that, that's at therealjourney.org. That's a whole separate thing. But if you're interested in it, feel free to reach out.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, James. Thanks for sharing your story, your messages. And I hope, and I'm sure some people will reach out. You're helping, you can help and have helped a lot of people. So great talking to you. And thanks.